Okay, I'm going to run through one of my older lectures on energy and fossil fuels with a focus on conflict and systems disruption because that's what's happening in the world economy right now with the wars in the Middle East. So I'll go through most of this really quickly, but if you have questions or interest in learning more background information or references to the information presented here, please contact me. Also, I highly suggest Nate Hagens of The Great Simplification and the Oil Drum website, which is now offline but still available through archives for background information on oil, energy, sustainability, and environment. Personal experience in energy, I worked for a company founded by fossil fuel experts who were investing in microbial generation of methane for industrial production. I have 25 years of research and publishing in energy, conflict, and environmental news. I've also built and ran several small-scale biodiesel production facilities. So this lecture is going to cover just some basics of energy production, mostly fossil fuels, major changes and near-term trends, highlighting sociocultural evolution and behavior. This is where the real adaptations will be occurring in our lifetimes, even in the next 5 to 10 years. Massive changes in distribution of resources and cultural shifts will have to happen because the interruptions to fossil fuels and the conflicts that are ongoing are going to continue to disrupt a lot more than fossil fuels. The Hormuz Strait is not just a major route for about 20% of the world's fossil fuels, but it's also helium, which is used for construction of electronic devices and chips, food for GCC countries. There's an enormous amount of shipping that's being interrupted, enormous fertilizer, nitrogen flows through, nitrogen exports are being interrupted, so fuel production as well as production of high-tech components and fertilizers are all being interrupted. Geopolitical loops and feedback, supply chain disruptions, resilience, and preparing. So I'll have a little bit of information on self-catalyzing feedback loops in human behavior, especially those related to disruptions in supply chains. What does all that mean? Well, there's a lot of radical movement, quote unquote radical. There's a lot of environmental movements, social movements, and indigenous groups and people that have suffered horribly from wars for fossil fuel, as well as the negative externalities, the direct extraction of fossil fuels and other minerals. Those communities are really tired of being killed so that corporations can increase their profit and use that money to go to Epstein's Island or similar endeavors. And they're united and they've learned in open source methods. And sometimes, like in the case of the Mind in Nigeria, they fight back and win. The disruptions that'll be happening in the future to fossil fuels will be combinations of the effects of war as well as networked open source insurgencies and quote unquote radical movements. So for normal people, average people, your best focus is on your own individual resilience. So becoming healthier without fossil fuels, looking at walking, riding your bike, switching to a different resource if you can, but really it's pretty late for that, and most people don't have access to the resources to make their own fuel. I can hopefully in a later presentation present some information on biodiesel and local scale biofuels, which will probably still never make up a big difference. Certainly helpful for those of us who don't like to contribute to using resources that absolutely require war and massive global disruption. This is a little background on the formation of the precursor to coal called anthracite, but the similar process is behind the formation of other fossil fuels. So in general, you have vegetation, which dies and is buried. It's forced into anaerobic conditions. This means without oxygen. So in the presence of oxygen, there are millions and billions of microbes, microorganisms that metabolize hydrocarbons, which would be in the sugar chains of plants and the carbohydrates of algae and biomass, the stuff that falls in the ground. They chew it up and they fart it back out as usually CO2 and other forms of carbon in some cases. So aerobic metabolism will lock in very, very tiny, minuscule amounts of carbon into the soil. Most of it's released back to the atmosphere. And you can look at the leaves on the ground here. They fall on the ground, they're chewed up because they're in the presence of oxygen, and then most of that carbon goes back to the atmosphere. That's called active carbon cycling. Now, the formation of fossil fuels happened in cases where environments compressed that biomass and moved it into anaerobic conditions. So underground, there's very little to no oxygen in many cases. And with pressure and compression, these hydrocarbons become more dense, forming different forms of what become fossil fuels. So most of these were formed 50 to 350 million years ago from the anaerobic deposits of organic biomass. So a lot of it's algae, ocean algae, compressed, plant matter, compressed. We're not getting more of this. So the peaking of oil is happening around the world, but that's peaking in production. This needs to be distinguished from peaking in the actual amounts. We'll talk about that a little bit more detail soon. But first, some energy definitions. Energy is defined most simply as the ability to do work. And in the case of physical systems and energies for industrial economies, this requires an investment to extract. So the investment is an investment of both energy as well as money. This calculation is referred to as EROEI, or energy required on energy, energy returned on energy invested, So the return of energy, how much you get back out of your investment. So you have to put in energy to get energy out of the fossil fuels that we have all over the world. Different forms of fossil fuels require different forms of inputs. If you have easy to refine light crude oil, like the stuff in Nigeria, in many places in the Niger Delta, it requires very little investment. It refines more easily into high profitable byproducts like gasoline and kerosene and diesel, and these are quickly sold. So companies love that stuff because it's quick profit. It tends to be very disruptive and destructive too. Global energy production by conventional means appears to be peaking in production. I highlight that and I say that twice in the sentence because, again, people who pointed out peak oil, those of us 20, 25 years ago that were ranting about this stuff, were often dismissed as doomsayers and Cassandras and all this. But we made it very, very clear what was happening, and most of us attempted to explain in detail how these systems work and that the production of oil is peaking, not the actual amounts. So it's not completely the end of the world. Again, we're frequently criticized and dismissed as doomsayers. We're just bumping into the realities, the head walls of the real world difficulties in increased production of a limited amount of fuel that disrupts society and destroys environments. Global change scientists have urgently also explained current energy dynamics, or what's called business as usual, are not sustainable. That is a hilarious understatement at this point. I would characterize the side effects, the negative externalities of the industrial economy as gonzo, insane, destructive. And that should be pretty evident by now if you don't have your head somewhere dark and in an echo chamber. Energy future will be volatile, uncertain, difficult to predict. Production and distribution adaptation will be decentralized, adopting a wide variety of technologies. There's plenty of high-tech stuff now that you can buy on your own in many cases, or begin researching and adopting to lower your energy uses, to become more efficient, and to get off fossil fuels. There won't be any central replacement to fossil fuels. I don't think. I'd say 99.9% sure that. Okay, briefly, this is world energy use by different types of power. This graphic's a bit outdated, but more or less it stands to represent the fact that oil, coal, and natural gas are still the vast majority of global energy resources. Renewables are making an increasing amount of energy production. Nuclear is still a very small amount. Social stratification in energy. Again, these numbers on the left here, the millions of barrels of oil produced a day, are a bit out of date. These are from 2009. But the point is to show the breakdown of stratification in the use of energy. Energy use is not at all distributed evenly across the world. The U.S. uses way more energy per day than any other country. European Union's not too far behind. China also not too far behind. And then there's small island nations like Kiribati that use tiny amounts. The point is that the real massive changes that need to be occurring should be happening on the most wasteful energy users, the most wasteful corporations, the most destructive institutions, and those are generally things that we don't want in action at this level on a complete global scale. Specifically, I'm talking about the U.S. military is just burning fossil fuels in order to steal more fossil fuels, to do this sort of cycle again and again without the ability to force any sort of long-term change. Jevons paradox refers to William Stanley Jevons, who studied steam energy more than 100 years ago, or maybe it was about 100 years ago. And he points out something very important to remember. Just increasing the efficiency of a technology does not decrease the use of energy. So making a more fuel-efficient car doesn't mean human behavior changes. People will often, in fact, drive the car more because it's more energy efficient. That results in more fossil fuel use. Or this is true for steam, as Jevons studied, or other energy sources. So the thing we're getting at with pointing this out is that the changes that are going to be forced upon us, whether we like it or not, but can also be very productive, are cultural changes, changes in our social structures. On an individual level, this might mean something as simple as reaching out to friends and saying, hey, fuel prices are really high. Can we organize, figure out who among us has a fuel the most fuel efficient car and do ride sharing to get to work. Other steps would be figuring out, you can look up and find things like an older Volkswagen Jetta that run on diesel that get 50 miles a gallon. Again, it's not as fancy and neato as a brand new Tesla, but you can't afford those anyway. And they still require a huge impact on the Earth system. Whereas a Jetta can run on biofuel, you can go back to running it on diesel, and it gets really good gas mileage. There's older indirect injection engines. The Ford IDI, we ran the 7.3 diesel. We ran on biodiesel many times, changed out the rubber for Viton, so it's not affected by the biofuel. It works really great. Those trucks have skyrocketed. I think they've tripled in value because those older indirect injection diesel engines will last 1 million miles with proper maintenance, and they can burn really anything. So in an emergency, having an older Mercedes, an older IDI, some diesel engine, there's newer ones too, as long as they don't have DPF filters and EGR, exhaust gas recirculations, they'll run on biofuels, highly filtered vegetable oils, animal fats, if they're processed correctly. Motor oil can be microfiltered down and burned in some of these engines, and kerosene. Those aren't environmentally preferable, but we're not going to fix the environment by switching fuels. Stop looking for saviors to save the world. Stop looking for heroes. Stop looking for Captain Planet, especially not in Elon Musk or anyone running a big energy corporation. You're going to have to take care of your own environment, your own human health, and start figuring out how to adapt in your own way to energy decline. Access and utilization of energy is typically distributed through social dominance hierarchies. Humans have the tendency to form violent dominant hierarchies based on their background primate behavior. They can also be prestige hierarchies. So you can have someone at the top of the hierarchy that is lifted to that level because of prestige. Right now in our culture and world culture, that's quite rare. Most of the people at the top of your social hierarchies, in other words, most of the people with high levels of wealth, most of your institutions with holding on to high levels of wealth, most of the groups organizing and determining how the world works for now are extremely violent. Humans also can form social networks where they can distribute information and resources in alternative fashions. I'll talk more about that later because these are the adaptations that we're going to be forced into using. Again, social networks. This is pretty simple stuff in a lot of cases. It just means reaching out to people who have the right answer at the right time instead of waiting for the answer to come from your corrupt politicians, your president, your corporate leaders. World liquids production in total, again, there's plenty of hydrocarbons in the ground, crude, natural gas, liquids, and the other includes butane, propane, and other energy-dense hydrocarbons. You can see here in 2020 in the pandemic, there's a slight deviation, a downturn in production of all of these energy resources, and now it's starting to level back out again at about 100 million barrels a day on a global scale. This won't go up much. Maybe there'll be a couple little spikes in world production, but probably not anymore. This is the peaking of oil on a global scale. I highlight this direct quote because it came from an environmental textbook that I was teaching from in 2016 or 2017 at Johnson & Wales University. The Friedland text, quotes, if current global use patterns continue, we will run out of conventional oil supplies in less than 40 years. Well, we're going to run out of the supplies, not just because there's less of them in the ground, but mostly because they're so damaging and so disruptive, and we have deviant hierarchies fighting over them and disrupting their distribution. So whether you like it or not, fossil fuels are going to increase in price. Relies on fossil fuels, which is a whole lot of stuff in your daily life, will also mostly increase in price. It is time to switch resources on a personal scale, change behavior, start looking for new innovations that actually make sense to a post-growth global economy. That means you can grow in other ways. Free time, health and wellness, music, art. There are things in the world to do with your human life other than try and fight to make more money. Surprise. Now, doesn't anyone know how to handle peak oil and peak energy? Now, these are big problems, and many experts have spoke about them for decades and decades. And it just, when you look at the situations in the world right now, it just seems like no one has the answers. Well, yes, the people that do have the adaptations and answers have been around and working on trying to explain all this, but they typically don't have much power or influence. That's not so much a fault of their own, but a shortcoming of our individual or overall societal structures. We lie to ourselves and say, we'll keep using fossil fuels. It's okay. There's no other alternative. It's something that almost everyone has to do in their lives, or claims they have. I shouldn't say they don't have to do it. We do this instinctively and socially because we're stuck in patterns of behavior dictated by the hierarchy and reinforced by the behaviors of people around us. All of this has to break and will fall apart. But it can be mended, and we can still have some technology and some sort of better future when we redefine growth and think about the actual impacts of the resources we use, and then also remove the kid-eating, kid-fucking corporate leaders and politicians that run the world still. Energy extraction, production, and consumption fluctuate as a complex adaptive system that is highly sensitive and virtually impossible to predict. It's dependent on unknown factors. We, despite studying all this stuff for years and years and years, we still don't really know exactly what's going to happen day to day, because our complex adaptive system the global economy has gotten so complex that it's very sensitive to changes in unpredicted disruptions and in small skewer points and choke points in the distribution can and do make massive rippling effects throughout the rest of the world. Geology can be known, quote unquote. So mostly we can figure out how much oil and hydrocarbons are left, but it's geopolitics that's much more uncertain. I mentioned briefly before an example of geopolitical uncertainty leading to global oil prices spiking happened in about 2008. This was right around the time of the global housing crisis. Oil spiked to about $148 a barrel, its highest price ever so far. We're probably going to exceed that. $200 to $300 a barrel oil is likely in the near future. This was the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta. They began, despite having sought the legal, culturally widespread acceptable solutions to the problems that were wrought upon the Niger Delta by shell oil and oil extraction. They didn't see any progress for their community, so they ended up fighting back, bunkering oil, bombing pipelines, and destroying oil infrastructure. So this is an example of a modern-day open-source insurgency that successfully routed Shell from their local area. There is a wonderful documentary called Poison Fire, which I link here, to explain the details of how that worked, and also covers a lot of the actual efforts. Again, these mainstream society and most people would look at this and say, oh, these are radicals and they're horrible people, they're violent, they're attacking oil infrastructure and hurting people. Well, that is the result, the real world result of the failures, because they didn't start with that. They started, as you can see in Poison Fire, by addressing through the legal channels and political action and protests and poetry, like Ken Saro-Wiwa. They made all the efforts in traditional methods to carefully and in a relatively socially acceptable method stop the fossil fuel industry from destroying their habitat and the places where they lived and fished. Those companies quickly destroyed the lifestyles and ecology of the Niger Delta, and the result was physical violence. This will happen all over the world, more and more, to companies, corporations, and individuals who don't start making at least slight changes, and in some cases big drastic changes, in their behavior. Sorry, that's life. Results of past energy policy. Again, you have lots of global systems disruption and conflict. This is an image of the Deepwater Horizon accident. This highlights something I mentioned before. The last bits of fossil fuels that we have on the planet, what's left over after we went for that easy to profit from stuff, they're hard to reach. It's not easy to get to oil that's buried thousands of feet beneath ocean. And lax regulations, sloppy behavior, these result in more and more accidents, as well as just the overall background of the negative impacts of fossil fuel extraction, which are compounding now in everything from the side effects of the chemical pollutants to widespread ecosystem shifts. I'll talk about the ecology and the environmental impacts of fossil fuel use in a later lecture. But we are seeing ocean temperatures pass critical tipping points in which entire coral reef systems are just eliminated, as well as massive changes in forests, feedback loops in desiccation and drying of rainforests, as well as wildfire shifts in northern hemispheres, rapid global ice melt everywhere in the world, glaciers and ice sheets and sea ice are disappearing quite quickly. Again, the solutions are going to be social for the most part. Deindustrialize, reduce and eliminate reliance on industry and centralized distribution, strengthen local community resilience, prepare for the likely future conditions, and leverage open source sharing and collective intelligence. Not utopia, certainly not easy, but it's better than dying in a war for oil or choking to death on pollution. An example of systems disruption that was caused by ecological event was Hurricane Katrina. This happened in 2005, I believe. The heart of the U.S. oil production and its refining capacity lost about 25% production due to Katrina. Most of these refineries are located in South Texas and Louisiana, and they were shut down because of this enormous hurricane. Category 5. Pipelines were also shut down. Gasoline shortages occurred throughout the Southeast. The shortage lasted several months, but eventual fossil fuel depletion will cause lasting problems and high prices. So we can see these events causing these scary interruptions that result in massive gas lines, fighting over energy resources, fighting over your place to get your fuel for your car or SUV or tank or whatever you drive. So there'll be ups and downs. Those will keep happening. But overall, fossil fuel depletion will cause long, protracted increase in price and force lifestyle changes. Again, there's plenty of hydrocarbons left, but they're hard to get to. They're stable in volume, but the quality of the fossil fuel on the planet now are lower. They yield less energy return, less profit, and the extraction is more difficult. They're enormously environmentally and socially destructive too. Social and ecological pressures that are now facing the oil industry. War and conflict, especially war and conflict in choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, results in systems disruption of the entire global economy. Physical destruction of pipelines and infrastructure has also been happening and continues to happen due to abrupt warming. Examples are the permafrost melt. This is permanently frozen land in high latitude areas. Examples like Siberia as well as Alaska. The land was frozen, the infrastructure for pipelines was built. As that permafrost turns into permamelt, it rips apart the pipelines, it breaks roads, and causes mass amount of damage. Another influence in systems disruption has been and will continue to be radical environmental movements. Quote unquote radical, of course. Mainstream earth science and policy plans, these might also lead to disruption of the fossil fuel industry. There are plans for climate lockdowns. So imagine a future in which you may have governments telling you stay at home because it's too hot outside, too polluted in the air, and we can't have you sheeple driving your cars anymore. Okay, so as governments of different countries start imposing those sorts of restrictions and saying stay at home, work from home, don't drive your car, or combining like they're doing in Vietnam and other Southeast Asian regions, forcing QR codes for you to buy fuel. Keep in mind who your politicians are, what their history is, who's imposing these rules, and try to work around them when necessary by adopting your own solutions. Because this is what we're in for. More energy collapse, those governments, or at least aspects of them, are still going to be fighting over energy in regions that are already highly volatile. So this combined market state resource wars plus climate and ecosystem collapse and non-state actors will continue to result in enormous disruption to the fossil fuel economy throughout the near future. In a lot of biodiverse regions and other parts of the world too, where there already are efforts to restore habitat, we have to watch out for greedback loops, which are positive feedback loops in extractive destructive practices. So, for example, as gold rises in price due to economic instability, many more people will go into a feedback loop or greedback loop in buying more gold so that they can shutter away in their homes or bunkers and wait for the rest of the world to fall apart. This causes more illegal extraction of gold, putting more pressure on habitats and natural environments, which are already under a lot of pressure and being destroyed by multiple different factors. The habitat and biodiversity are the things that provide ecosystem services. They clean the air, they clean water, they provide medicine, they provide food. By investing in gold and metals and fake values, fake storage of value, we cause these greedback loops and inevitably cause more destruction into the natural world. So we have to just get out there and start making a difference more and more, bit by bit, to restore living systems. So there are plenty of vocations, solutions, and adaptations for the global change emergency. These are just a few of the suggestions that I have for future vocation. EMT, emergency medical tech, wilderness first aid, paramedic. Most of these are internationally acceptable, so you can get a job if you have to move to another country, which many people will for various reasons. They're internationally accepted typically and will be broadly useful across cultures around the world. There's just going to be a lot more emergency disasters and need for emergency responders. This also gives you background and education for you to be able to take care of yourself when states fail and regular institutions fail. Security for state failure, you'll have to learn more about cybersecurity, protecting your information, protecting yourself physically, and noticing aspects of culture that are turning into more violent, more destructive pathways. So keeping that in mind is important for the future because a lot of places can quickly degenerate into violence and just background theft and scams. They're so common these days. Post-industrial mental health, holistic healing, the mind and body, remediation of industrial toxins in the environment and human body. These are all valid, useful pursuits. There's lots of different pathways to get degrees or at least experience in these modalities and practices. De-occulting and treating technological addiction is also going to be a major part of the future as our economies have forced technology and culture based on all these occult practices on young people. People are brainwashed. They are confused, scared, and behaving quite utterly ridiculously. So this is another realm of restoration that happens at individual and cultural levels. Other things, diesel mechanics, general mechanical and building skills will be required more frequently for the future. And once you've achieved some level of independent resilience, open source everything, collective intelligence, and the study of memetics will help you process information relative to the future and to understand what's happened in our past that led us along these routes into the world we're in now. There's also all sorts of potential progress. Toyota, for example, in technology related to fossil fuels and transition. Toyota, for example, in at least some areas of Western Europe, have introduced Hilux and Land Cruiser models that are able to use up to 100% renewable sources like waste cooking oil. So they've changed the injector systems. These vehicles will run on, you can switch between regular diesel as well as waste cooking oil. And again, a lot of these you can do on your own if you learn which diesel engines are best for it and put in some of the work to figure out how to use this. Again, there's not enough waste cooking oil to go around to build a business. Do it for yourself and maybe a couple other people that are like-minded, form a co-op. It's going to be more limited in the future as more people realize how useful older diesels are. So 7.3 liter IDI engine, these vehicles have about tripled in value over the past 5 to 10 years for a good reason. They last long and can run on multiple fuel sources. So finding out other sources for these oils, for diesel motors, will require more research into microalgae, algae production for oil. This is a vegetable oil produced by cells that are typically microscopic until they colonize. Jatropha is a high oil yielding plant. However, a lot of these Jatropha for biofuel efforts have failed because people didn't understand you do have to put in fertilizer inputs and nutrients to get high yields of oil in the Jatropha, whereas there's other smaller aquatic plants like Azolla that can provide vegetable oils with less input of fertilizer and things that depend on fossil fuels. So I'll have some more information on solutions and adaptations in a later lecture. Hope this helped.